Hello, and welcome back to Warning Signs. I am Kate Majot, a domestic violence survivor, therapist, and author. This podcast is my serial narration of my Warning Signs book series as I turn them each into audiobooks. Warning Signs is my memoir about domestic violence. It feels like a fun romance adventure story, but after each chapter, I explain the domestic violence that was occurring. According to the Human Rights Campaign, 35% of heterosexual women, 44% of lesbians, 61% of bisexual women, and 54% of transgender people have experienced domestic violence. The National Coalition for Domestic Violence reports the following numbers for men: 26% of gay men, 37% of bisexual men, and 29% of heterosexual men. Domestic violence affects all of us. Listen on to learn about how it happened, to help yourself and others heal, and to prevent it from continuing to happen. As the book and podcast series progress, there will be a few episodes with more extreme emotional and physical violence. I will make a trigger warning before these chapters. Thank you for being courageous enough to listen, and be sure to give yourself some healing time and space between episodes, especially as we progress in the series. To all of the survivors out there, this is for you. Thank you. In this episode, I plan our wedding. Chapter 10, Planning. Fall in Vegas was spectacular. The few older trees that were around became bright red and orange, which was a welcome addition of color to the desert scene, with young green trees lining every street. It was still hot. Not quite as hot as the penetrating summers, but seemingly more manageable, with the optimism of the end of insufferable heat just around the corner. We spent fall evenings hanging out at friends' backyards and patio bars, soaking up the gentle 90-degree sun. Clint had been laid off from his job that fall, so he and Jenny moved back home to the Northwest. Jason and I were sad, and we became even more grateful for our Las Vegas friends. Our two close friends, Missy, who attended my birthday dinner, and Chris, got married that fall. They had a beautiful outdoor golf course ceremony and a seated 4-course dinner reception. Jason and I observed what we liked and didn't like and found inspiration for our own wedding plans. We loved that they chose individual songs for each group of people in the procession, suited to the couple's taste, and we loved the simple floral arrangements. We hated that after the ceremony the couple had their photos taken, and we had to wait for them while we sat at the same table that we were relegated to all night. We compared mental notes and were pleased that we shared the same opinions about how we would plan our own wedding. Since we agreed on most everything, Jason said he trusted me to plan our wedding. The art museums and galleries all ended up being too expensive once we factored in table and chair rentals and catering. Instead, we found a beautiful hotel that featured artwork and books on its walls that already had tables and chairs and a caterer. It was perfect. Then, over the next 8 months, I spent countless nights researching myriad options. I looked at hundreds of wedding photography websites and narrowed it down to a few photographer choices. I also did this with flowers, decorations, and every other aspect of the wedding. Then I presented the options to Jason for us to decide together, just like I did with the venues. I enjoyed all the research, but also found it took a lot of time. On work breaks, I called vendors, and at night, I relayed my findings to Jason. I was constantly thinking about the wedding and what decisions needed to be made. Each time we narrowed something down or decided something, it seemed like another impending decision came forward. One day, I asked him if we could look at wedding decoration ideas, and he said he was tired of talking about the wedding. He made me agree to only ask him about it one day of the week. He even added a tab to my 1 GB wedding Excel sheet. The tab title was, "Can we talk about the wedding today?" The Excel formula output was, enter the day of the week, and if the day is Sunday, the formula says yes. If the day is any other day, the answer is no. I chuckled. I was amused and impressed about his solution. On the inside, though, I felt alone in planning our wedding. He felt we needed more balance in our lives, and I felt he didn't understand how much work went into planning the perfect wedding. His idea of balance was working and relaxing. It never seemed to include planning for the future in any way. This frustrated me, but I kept chugging ahead with the research while he grew frustrated I wasn't relaxing with him and focusing more on our TV shows. He told me multiple times he was fine with anything I chose, and I appreciated that he trusted me. One time, I went to California to visit family and I went to IKEA to buy wedding decorations. I chose simple, clear, square vases to hold roses and candles. When I came home, he said he didn't like anything I bought. He said then, at the moment, but not earlier, that he had wanted round vases. I liked the square ones because they were more modern, but he said he didn't care and that they were ugly. I almost returned everything because he seemed so mad about it, but eventually he let me keep them since he knew it was more hassle than it was worth to try and ship back 25 vases to the store. More importantly, though, I stressed how important it was that we made decisions together. I didn't want this to be my wedding. I wanted it to be our wedding. So I did my research and patiently waited for his Sunday wedding opinions. I also wanted him to take care of and have more say in some aspects. So I asked him to choose the music and honeymoon. He agreed. He listened to music more often than I did, as I preferred listening to the news, and he still worked in leisure travel. We both understood these were aspects he would enjoy and where his knowledge reigned. It was March 2012, just 3 months prior to our wedding date, though, and he still hadn't made any decisions. We spent one evening talking about music and listening to different style ideas. It was the most fun we had had together in a while. It really felt like we were bonding and being equally invested in our wedding. We chose several songs, and I chose the remaining ones later that week. The next week, we planned the honeymoon. He really wanted to go back to Greece, so he insisted we were going there. I reminded him that there's so much more of the world to see, and it would be good for him to see and experience more. I also told him I had always wanted to go to France, so I suggested a trip that included both countries. He complained that would cost more money and take more time. I told him I wasn't going to Europe without seeing at least one part of France. He told me he wasn't going if he couldn't see at least one of the islands in Greece. We were both frustrated. I checked prices on a few trip options and realized we didn't have enough money for both, let alone any country in Europe. I said to Jason, "So we can't afford Europe." I looked up a few major Asian cities, then the rest of the continents. I pouted. "Well, we can't afford any cities outside of North America, not even Central America." He laughed. "So we've narrowed it down to North America?" We cracked up. We knew there were innumerable choices inside North America. We talked about domestic ideas such as New Orleans or New York, but they didn't feel fancy enough. We looked at options in Mexico, but he insisted then we had to go to an all inclusive resort. I had no interest in an all inclusive vacation, as I relished experiencing food and dining as part of the culture. We finally settled on the Caribbean. Neither of us had ever been, and we were excited. We could afford it, we got time to lay on the beach, and we got to explore a new culture. It checked all of the boxes for both of us. We spent the next few weeks researching the islands and comparing their benefits. We chose an island and booked our trip. Planning the wedding was difficult and stressful, yet ultimately a fun learning experience. We, well, mostly I, created the perfect wedding for us. After the wedding, my dad told me, "You know how to throw one hell of a party." Chapter 10, Warning Signs. The amount of compromises I made with Jason become clearer here. He told me he trusted me to plan the wedding, so I did plan most of it, but I also felt he said that to manipulate me to do all the work. I tried to make decisions with him early on, but he grew easily frustrated, and he eventually made the Excel sheet to tell me he would only discuss it one day of the week. I saw that he was trying to help me by telling me to relax, but there was so much to do that I felt I couldn't do it all alone. I also didn't want to do it alone. because it was our wedding. I shouldn't have felt alone in planning our wedding. In a healthy relationship, people make decisions together and do their best to put in an equal amount of work. In healthy relationships, people also don't tell people when they can and cannot bring up important conversation topics. They do set boundaries, though, which he was doing. In this situation, it was a very fine line between him setting a boundary of when he would allow the conversation topic and not allowing me to have conversations with him. It is perfectly acceptable for him to have set boundaries. The reason this became a problem, though, is that I did not set my own boundaries, so I unknowingly allowed him to hurt and control me. When one person vies for control and the other person does not set their boundaries about what they will and will not accept, then the person vying for control can gain more and more control of the other person. If I had set my own boundaries of what behavior and communication I would and would not allow, I would have recognized when he crossed them and said something. Then, if I had said something and he did not respect my boundary, then perhaps I would have ended the relationship. At this time in my life, though, I did not know what boundaries were, so I did not know where to set them. This is the crux of this book. If people know what the warning signs of abuse are, then they will know where to set their boundaries and prevent the abuse from occurring or leave when it does. If I had recognized that all Jason's quote unquote teasing and putting me down was actually emotional abuse, and if I had set a boundary around myself to not allow that, then I might have stopped it from happening or left him. I picture a boundary like a hula hoop around myself. The hula hoop spins around me, creating a space between me and the other person. I can hula hoop with another person nearby and even touching one another, but the other person would also still be spinning their hula hoop around themselves, creating their own space and energy. If either of us touched one another's hula hoop, then it would stop it from spinning and crash to the ground, thereby eliminating the boundary of the hula hoop. This is not to say that we do not allow people to enter our spaces in healthy relationships, including non-romantic relationships. It is to say that even when we do allow someone into our space, people that respect us will respect our boundaries. I can allow people to come into the hula hoop area with me, but only if I choose to move the hula hoop up or down or allow them to step through. This person would then be inside my bubble, but they would not have broken the actual hula hoop. If someone disrespects a boundary, then that person does not respect the person with boundaries and has a greater likelihood of controlling and or abusing that person. I recommend making a list for yourself as a bare minimum set of boundaries. When I did ask Jason for input on wedding decisions, he didn't fairly communicate with me. He insisted we did things his way. He insisted we would go to Greece. He insisted we would go to an all-inclusive resort. And he insisted I return the vases he thought were ugly. Thankfully, I spoke up and he did not win any of those points. But that does not change how his insistence made me feel. I felt emotionally invaded because he was trying to cross my boundaries. This can also be viewed from the power and control wheel where it says using privilege. Under the most recent power and control wheel, it says treating you like a servant, making all the big decisions, being the one to define the roles or duties in the relationship, using privileges or ability to discredit you, cut off access to resources or use the system against you, or knowing what's best for you. Jason did this by insisting we would do things his way or not at all. He said we would only go to Mexico if we went to an all-inclusive resort, so we did not go to Mexico. The Caribbean ended up being great, and at the time, it felt as though we made equal compromises to arrive at that decision. But looking back, I know I compromised more than he did. I tried to give him the feeling of being in control in the areas that I thought he would enjoy, such as planning the music and the honeymoon. But when he hadn't started working on either of those 3 months before the wedding, I knew I had to step in to get things done. At the time, I saw it as him being lazy. Now, I see it as him purposely not doing anything as a way to manipulate me